Hello guys and gals, and welcome. So as of right now, on the 19th of May at 7:36 p.m., the 3.2 patch is currently out. Ladder does not reset until May 22nd, so it looks like everybody has some time to play around with the changes. So far, I've played around with some of the changes that they came out with, and most of it looks good. The Echoing Strike did get nerfed, but they reverted some of those changes, so it's actually looking not too horrible anymore. The Abyss nerfs got kind of rolled back, and that's actually really good. The Herald spawn rate is looking much better. It's not like too high or too low anymore. It seems to be right about where it needs to be. The Herald drop rate, on the other hand, seems to be a little too low. Seems like they may have overcompensated and nerfed the crap out of the Herald drop rate, but whatever. We've already heard several reports of people finding Sunders already, and it's only been up for like an hour or two, which is actually interesting. Looks good. Tainted looks good. The taint lock looks good. The overall, it looks like the Warlock is in a really good place now. It's actually balanced, which is, I think, what most people wanted. They wanted some balance. So what builds are good builds to make for Season 14? Well, aside from the obvious they nerfed Echoing Strike, you could still build Echoing Strike if you run the Hexbane or the Hex Purge versions of Echoing Strike instead of the full Echoing Strike version, which still seem to work surprisingly well. Mirrored Blades, which is the bow lock essentially, is a very powerful build, and there are tons of different variations of the bow lock that you could make, including a fire bow lock, a magic bow lock, a physical bow lock, and even a proc lock, which still works surprisingly well. I was afraid they were actually going to nerf that into the dirt. On top of that, you can very easily do a summon Warlock. It's still perfectly viable. The Bind Demon is a little bit more tanky than it was on PTR. Exactly how tanky the Warlock, the Bind Demon is at this point, I'm not entirely sure, but it's definitely less tanky than it was before, but more tanky than it was on the PTR, so it's somewhere in between now. The Tainted, however, is super powerful, and if you set up like a full Taint lock, you can get easily like 20k Fireball on the Taint lock. It does require some significant equipment to make it worthwhile, though. You need either Infinity or a Plague Sword or a Pus Bitter for the ability to cast lower res from your Mirrored Blades. You're going to need some form of negative res because negative res on equipment doesn't work with the Tainted, but it is actually a really powerful build in general. Now, what if you don't want to play a Warlock? You played the Warlock last season, you're bored with the Warlock, you want to do something else. Well, every single character, for the most part, has gotten a pretty considerable amount of what I would call increased damage, or rather like bonus negative res, or however you want to like state it. There's essentially all the classes have gotten a buff. There's 2 different ways, if not even 3 different ways in some cases, or 4 different ways in some cases, that every class has got a buff. The first one is the Guardian slash Protector, whatever, the jewels. These jewels have negative 10% to a resistance, and they also have plus 10% positive to a specific skill damage, right? This means that in general, every single character, if over a regular facet, is getting an additional plus 5/5 just from the facet. Not counting anything else that's on those Protector jewels either, because some of them have some really nice stats. Like, for instance, the physical one has 40% enhanced damage, which actually works really well if you socket it into a weapon, because it actually functions as on-weapon enhancement in that case and does really good damage. And now, granted, a lot of the weapons that people like to use are rune words, and that doesn't work. But if you happen to be using a non-rune word weapon, the Guardian Jewel in the actual weapon is actually astoundingly good, whereas putting the Guardian Jewel in your helmet or armor actually causes a bug, which causes your enhanced damage to only function on minimum or maximum damage, which is kind of hilarious. It has to do with a bug that's been in the game for a really long time, but in general, these jewels themselves add a huge bonus to the character. On top of that, you also have the renewed Sunder Charms. The renewed Sunder Charms all offer either 10% skill damage, or they offer negative 10% resistance. This means that pretty much every character by default, without any exception, is either negative 15% higher or plus 15% higher. And it's actually not bad because it'll either be negative 15/5 or it will be negative 5/15, one or the other. Which is actually a pretty big buff for some of these characters because a lot of the characters, like for instance a Javazon, for instance, Javazons can get some pretty crazy negative res, and if you're running like a Griffin's Eye and you put one of the Guardian Jewels in your Griffin's Eye, now you can get negative 10 instead of negative 5. You can put on the Sunder Charm that has negative 10 on it. By the time you're done, you can get a hell of a lot more negative res than you could before. There's also other ways that you can get negative res and also positive skill damage that didn't exist before. In particular, magic damage characters, like for instance, Bone Spear, Hammerdin. Also, you could include Holy Bolt, although tentatively, and also, of course, the Warlock. Gained a lot of things that give plus magic skill damage, which never existed before, by the way. Plus magic skill damage and negative magic resistance, or enemy magic resistance. These things are actually really cool because they allow you to get even more damage out of these characters that you couldn't get damage out of before. So as an example, if you were doing a Bone Spear Necromancer, you can get obviously an additional negative 15 or positive 15 to the damage or to the resistance, one way or the other. I would probably choose the negative 15 if I were anybody because it makes the bosses easier. And then on top of that, you can also get magic skill damage or negative magic resistance on the form of equipment. Now, there's a couple pieces of equipment that you can potentially get. There's the Hell Warden's Will Helmet, which has up to like negative 8%, I believe, magic resistance. There's also the new rings. There is the Sling ring. There is also the Opal Vein. A lot of them have either plus magic skill damage or negative magic resistance on them. And you can stack them. If I remember correctly, there's also an amulet that comes with either magic skill damage or the other. I believe it's on my Procolock. Let's hop on Sisma's Procolock, shall we? Yes, this one right here, which is plus 10% magic skill damage. So across the board, there's a lot of ways that you can potentially increase the damage of characters that you may have already played before. And I know that last season was the season of the Warlock. But this season, you might be inclined to play something else, and you might be looking for a reason to play something else. Well, the reason why you might play something else is because it's a lot stronger than it was in previous seasons. All into account, depending on which build you are making, you're probably going to see anywhere between a 20 to 50% damage increase on basically just about any character you want to play. If you want to do a Javazon, why not? The Javazon can get the Guardian Jewel now and the new Sunder, and by the time she's done, she's going to be killing cows at a speed that you've never seen before. Even sub-characters like maybe a Poison Javazon are going to be doing a lot more than they were ever able to do before. There's also an added benefit to this, because if you go in this particular direction, the gear is going to be much cheaper, because a lot of people are still going to be focused on the Warlock, maybe the Taint lock, and several other builds. So if you're playing one of these lesser done builds, you're going to be able to pick up the gear a lot cheaper. Like, well, last season, for instance, I picked up Griffin's Idea Dem for basically nothing. Which is because everybody was playing the Warlock, and there's no real lightning builds on the Warlock at this point, unless you want to set up like a Taint lock with the original Blind Demon Tainted. All in all, I'm looking at a couple different builds that I was thinking of. Now, one thing to take into account is the whole Thorns thing. These new Heralds, and there's going to be a lot of Heralds that have Thorns. Melee builds, especially melee physical builds, are going to be less potent against Thorns. In fact, you're probably going to end up killing yourself. They did fix a bug with the Thorns on the Heralds. Apparently the Thorns was applying twice, but that doesn't really matter because honestly, if you're a really high physical damage character and you hit one of the Thorns monsters with a high physical damage attack, you are most likely going to kill yourself. I do have a video out on Thorns and how to deal with Thorns, but I will bring it down to the most simplest equation that I can for you for this video because I don't want to go into like full detail. The most important thing to know is that Thorns only affects melee and only affects physical damage. However, there are two forms of Thorns that you have to know about. There is the reflect and there is the attacker takes damage of portion. The reflect will only reflect melee physical. Alright, it has to be melee and physical, not just physical and not just melee. It has to be both. For the attacker takes damage of section, it does not have to be physical damage. It only has to be melee. This part is a flat damage number. And it's most susceptible to fast attacks. So melee that attack very, very quickly are the most susceptible to attacker takes damage of, where reflect is more a physical damage proportion. In other words, if you are not dealing physical damage, then you are fine versus the reflect. But as a melee, you will still suffer from the attacker takes damage of, regardless of whether you are doing physical damage or not. An example of this would be Berserk. Berserk converts 100% of your physical damage into magical damage, and this means that you don't have any physical damage, which means that the reflect does not work on Berserk. However, the attacker takes damage of does work on Berserk, and every time you hit the monster, you will still get the reflection from the attacker takes damage of, which is the flat amount. The flat amount is not extremely high. It may be anywhere between like 80 to maybe like 250 damage per strike, which could get amplified by various means like Decrepify, Amplify Damage, low physical resistance, etc. Blah, blah, blah. And it can be nasty if you attack extremely fast because you can kill yourself really fast. Look at my HP right now. I currently have, what? 1680, right? So 1680. And you divide that by 250. How many hits is it going to take me to kill myself? It's going to take me 6.72 hits to kill myself. So roughly about 7 hits and I'll be dead. Attacker takes damage of is insidious because it applies whether you hit the target or not, which does not allow you to regenerate. So to put this into perspective, when you hit a target, you leech, right? So you leech. However, attacker takes damage of does not require a hit. It only requires an attempt. Only an attempt. This means that if you don't hit the target, you don't leech, but you still take the Thorns. Which means it's going to punish you if you have bad accuracy. Because if you are hitting the target, you can potentially leech your life back and counter the attacker takes damage of. But if you miss, you just take the damage and you don't get anything in return. I have a whole video going over this in more detail if you're interested in making a melee character for the season. I don't necessarily recommend making a melee character unless you're a more advanced player, because you will one-shot yourself. I've done it before. I have one-shot myself on Thorns. I've one-shot myself on my own Thorns, to put that in perspective, which is actually not so hard to do. It's actually pretty easy to one-shot yourself on your own Thorns if you use the Paladin with conviction or conversion. You basically convert a monster, and then the monster obtains your own Thorns. And then when it switches back, you accidentally hit the monster while the Thorns is still on the monster, and you just kill yourself. I would also recommend this season probably avoiding Act 2 or Act 5 Mercenaries. Mainly just because Act 2 and Act 5 Mercenaries are going to one-shot themselves on the Thorns just like you would. They're melee characters, and they're physical damage melee characters. They have a large amount of physical damage, and there's really not much you can do about it. You could potentially take an Act 5 Merc and put like 2 Lawbringers on them, which are 0 physical damage weapons, and essentially try and use it that way. But the problem is that the main mechanic that most mercenaries use to stay alive is leeching. And if they can't hit the target, then they can't leech. And if they hit the target and immediately kill themselves, well, then that's no good. And they're just going to end up one-shotting themselves on a regular basis. In general, what you want to be using this season is most likely either Act 1 or Act 3, because neither one of those will kill themselves. The Act 3 Merc doesn't hit anything. Not really, anyway. I've like randomly, very rarely seen him swing his sword, and it's just not common. The Act 1 Merc is ranged, so it doesn't matter. So the Act 3 Merc is a spellcaster, the Act 1 Merc is a ranged character. The Act 1 Merc is probably the best one for this season. Why is the Act 1 Merc slightly better than the Act 3 Merc? Because the Act 1 Merc can leech. The Act 3 Merc cannot leech. So that's the main problem with the Act 3 Merc, is that although the Act 3 Merc does not hit the monster and cause the Thorns to kill him, he will, however, still not really regenerate any HP very easily, so it's a little bit more difficult to keep him alive versus the Act 1, which will actively be attacking targets and leeching HP back. So the Act 1 Merc kind of wins out in most cases with the Thorns Heralds. Now, if you're not fighting the Thorns Heralds, you could use whatever one you wanted, but as soon as you start getting into Terror Zones and fighting the Thorns Heralds, it's definitely going to be noticeable that your Merc is going to be dead a lot. You're probably just better off with a Merc that's going to hang back and not run in there and die repeatedly. I'm actually kind of excited to test out a bunch of these builds to see which ones could potentially be amazing. I was thinking about potentially doing a poison build because it could be kind of nutty with all the extra negative resistance. I've done many characters before. In fact, most of the characters that I've done, I can kind of go through a list here. My Godzilla, I've already remade him. He was actually surprisingly good with the new bonuses. I put a Guardian Jewel in his diadem, and essentially he's got even more negative res than he ever had before. And he's crazy damage output. The Sonic Thor, which is basically the double crescent moon wielding barbarian, which would be probably really good this season for the horking of the heralds, is also really good. This one is based on lightning damage and has tons of negative res. Once you're done with this character, he has like almost negative, I think it's like 100% negative res between all of his equipment. He's running, if I remember correctly, it's 35 resistance for both crescent moons. He has the Griffin's Eye Diadem, which is 20, and then an additional 10 from the Guardian Jewel, so you're talking about another 30. And then he can potentially get 10 from the Sunder, and then he can also grab an additional, what is it? If he wants to, he can put 1 in his armor, or he can run like 4 in his armor. So either 5% here or an additional 20% here, one way or the other. And he has like negative 130% resistance to lightning, which basically means that he has no problem killing anything in the game, like whatsoever. It's all at negative 100%, and he can just continue to smash. And it's just even more potent than it was before. Holy Freeze Paladin, same thing, gets the additional negative 15%, which is huge for him. This character, oh, well, that's Mosaic Assassin. Nox is my poison character. My poison character would be even more powerful this season, too. The poison character is literally nothing more than just facets. Like, all the facets in the world that you can potentially put on. And the thing is that once you get, like, a super huge amount of facets on the character, you're basically just stacking negative res, right? So she has a 6-facet bow, 2-facet Crown of Ages, like a 3-facet armor, which the perfect would be a 4-facet armor. And just tons of poison, right? Well, she'd get an additional negative 10 on the charm, and one of these facets would get replaced by the Guardian, so she would be killing even faster than she could before. And to give you an idea of how fast she's killing right now, I mean, let's go murder some stuff real quick, shall we? What's up, Mr. Poison Boy? Oh no, you're just gonna die. You got poisoned. Oh, poor little baby. I'm actually kind of excited to see which one of the characters got like the biggest power boost. I think the magic characters specifically were the ones that got some of the biggest power boost in the entire game, specifically because of all the crazy equipment that came with those characters. I mean, for instance, let's go to one of my online characters. That's current for like season 13. And we have things like the Hell Wardens. As you can see, I have negative 13% enemy magic resistance, plus 7% magic skill damage. That could, of course, be perfect, which would be 10 magic skill damage. And I think, what is it, 18% magic, negative magic resistance, because it's 10 plus 8. You can also get things like the Sling Ring, which I believe I have the Sling Ring sitting around here somewhere as well. Where are you, Slingeth Ringeth? There's one of the Guardian Jewels right there. That's a magic, negative 9, 6 magic. It's a pretty nice one. Actually, well, the negative 9 is good, but the 6% is terrible. That is not as good. It is the boobies. Where's my Sling Ring hiding at? I know I got the Sling Ring and an Opal Vein around here somewhere. And both of those are really powerful. I was actually kind of curious how the plus magic skill damage affected, like, Holy Bolt, which could make a, for instance, a Fist of the Heavens Paladin extremely powerful this season. We'll have to see how that goes. I still haven't quite decided on what character I want to play. I was kind of leaning toward a Plague Javelin. I think Plague Javelin could be really interesting this season with all the negative resistance sources. Man, I stripped him naked. He is naked, boys. My poor little boy is naked. He just a naked little boy. And mainly just because the poison's already so powerful, but adding in the Guardian Jewel and the negative resistance from the actual, the Sunder looks pretty cool. And there's my Sling Ring. So that's a negative 5 magic Sling Ring that would go really good on a Bone Spear Necromancer, Hammerdin, various other characters. Of course, the Hexbane Warlock. And then there's the Opal Vein as well, which the Opal Vein comes in a bunch of different sources, so you can get plus poison skill damage. Plus poison skill damage would go really good with the Poison Necromancer as well. So the Poison Necromancer probably gets some pretty crazy usefulness out of this because it comes with a faster cast and the poison skill damage for teleporting around if you're using the Enigma. I think all in all, there's a lot of fun builds that you can potentially make now. Very powerful, much more powerful than they were before. I mean, we're probably talking about anywhere between 20 to 50% more damage over what they had before, depending on if you get the good equipment. And it honestly, it looks pretty nice. All of the builds, except for like a handful, have pretty much seen this bonus. The melee jewel specifically looks really interesting for other reasons. So let me pull up the melee jewel. So until recently, most of the time when you're talking about like the melee jewel or the socket, the melee socket, you usually talk about like 1540s. You talk about like an Ohm rune or something of that nature. But the Guardian Jewel is kind of crazy for how it works in terms of the bonus damage that it gives you on a physical item, and that is definitely not the right one. Let's go to the creepy RMT website. Nope, that's not even the right one either. Not even the right one either. Okay, well, let's just go back here. So one of the things it does is it does give damage directly to the weapon. So it gives 10 to 30 damage, which is the reason why the bug happens in the first place with the physical jewel. You also get the 15 to 20% enhanced damage, which is on weapon enhancement if you put it in a weapon. So for instance, if you were to put this in a Windforce, as an example, as a physical boson, you would get the 20% enhanced and the flat damage added to the bow directly, which would be a extremely powerful item to throw in there. And then, of course, you also get the negative enemy physical resistance, which is huge as well, because it combined together with the Sunder Charm that sets the monster to 95%. If you're using this that has negative 10%, that means the monster's already at negative 85%, which is actually a really good setup. Even characters like physical bosons are going to see a significant increase in damage output from things like the Guardian Jewel, the new Bone Break with the negative resistance on it. I mean, I would think all in all, you'd be looking at, as an example, I mean, you've got the negative 10%, right? So let's assume you're fighting a standard monster that has 50% physical resistance, and you come across a monster that has, like, you're just firing this bow at them, right? So you can get at least negative 20% just on your items, which brings a 50% resistant monster down to 30. On top of that, you have a monster that's 95% resistant because you're hitting them with the Sunder Charm. You can, of course, subtract 20 from that, which brings them down to 75. And then you also have the, like, amplify damage if you're running that, which is going to bring them down to negative 25, which means you'll be doing 25% more damage than you would normally. This jewel actually has a lot of connotations because you're going to want to put this in a weapon, which could potentially pull you away from using rune words. I know griefs are so amazing, and things like, Faith Bow are super duper amazing. But honestly, you don't want to put the Protector's Stone Melee Guardian Jewel in a helmet or an armor, because the problem is that it suffers from a glitch that has to do with minimum and maximum damage on an item at the same time as enhanced damage, which causes the enhanced damage to only apply to either the minimum or the maximum, which is a bug in the system. It hasn't been fixed. The min max enhanced damage bug. Let me see if I can pull up the details on it so I can give you an idea. So the enhanced damage, min-max damage bug in Diablo 2 Resurrected is a legacy interaction affecting non-weapon gear. When socketing an item with both enhanced damage and flat min-max damage modifiers, the enhanced damage fails to apply to both damage types. It only applies to the opposite value, and enhanced damage applies to min damage, completely neutralizing the bonus. So essentially, it takes your enhanced damage and just kind of ruins it, is what it does. So you really don't want to put this Guardian Jewel in a helmet or an armor because of this bug. If you guys have never heard of the bug, you can generally avoid it by just putting the item in the weapons instead. Apparently, socket in the right order. If you're socketing multiple jewels in non-weapon gear, like a 3-socket helmet or a 4-socket armor, always socket your enhanced damage jewels first, followed by your min-max jewels. The problem is that this jewel has enhanced damage and min-max on it at the same time, which is what creates the problem again in the first place. I think that's pretty much it. I think Season 14 is going to be pretty legit. There's going to be a lot of fun builds that you can do. The Taint lock is going to be off the hook. If you guys don't know about the Taint lock, I mentioned it earlier, but I've actually played around with the Taint lock already. I actually have a Taint lock already set up here. Hold on. That's my Quantum Leap character. I will show you the Taint lock real quick so you can see my Taint. I know that's what you guys came for. You really just wanted to see my Taint. It's alright. I'm used to it. So the Taint Lock is a pretty standard build. You basically are utilizing the minions more than anything else, who are doing massive amounts of damage, as you can clearly see. You basically just teleport in. You can either Blade Warp or you can Death Mark them. And you can just force your way in. Every time you teleport, they fire, which is pretty darn cool, honestly. And they all fire at the same time, which is extremely powerful. And even monsters like elites and stuff like that really don't stand much chance against 19,000 damage. Where is... Why am I not at 19,000 damage? What is going on? I should be at 19,000 damage. Did I steal all his gear? I did steal all his gear. Okay, he's missing a torch. He's missing an Annie. So he can't put on his his Chains of Honor, and he doesn't have his Ars Thor's Balos on. So it's actually kind of crazy, though, because think about it like this. I don't have a torch, I don't have an Annie, I don't have an armor, and I don't have a book, right? And I'm still sitting at 10,000 damage per fireball on the Tainted. If that doesn't tell you how kind of broken they are, I don't know what will. Maxing them out and getting them to utmost efficiency is going to take some significant gear. They are actually really fun to use, even without maximum gear. But at the end of the game, you do kind of need both lower resistance and conviction if you want to kill everything, because Mephisto has conviction, and that wouldn't work on him, because he'll just cancel out your conviction with his. So you probably need at least lower res in some way, One of the cheapest ways to get lower res for this build early on is literally just use Pus Spitter. Pus Spitter is a bow. It's a crossbow, actually, and you can utilize it with Mirrored Blades, which is actually really easy to use. You shoot 5 Mirrored Blades, and you can get your lower resistance proc with Mirrored Blades. It's actually kind of a brilliant way to do it. So you can either control these guys by warping, or you can control these guys by using the Deathmark ability. I actually prefer to use the Blade Warp because the Blade Warp actually locks them in place. As you can see, they cannot move when they're like that, so it's like having a turret system. Whereas if you use the Deathmark, you can teleport them a little bit easier, but as you can see, they don't really like to stand still and actually attack anything. Most of the time, anyway. You might be able to get them to stand still if you're lucky. Like if you cast them close enough to yourself, sometimes they won't move. Most of the time, they still move. But when you Blade Warp, they really don't move at all. They just kind of hang out and they just stand there. And you can really control where they go by that. Now, one of the things that you might have a problem with this is fire immunes. Fire immunes are an issue. Negative resistance, negative fire resistance does not apply. Negative enemy fire resistance does not apply to the Tainted. So you cannot decrease it with gear. You do need a Fire Sunder Charm to break the immunities, though. That is helpful. The way that you can bypass this, however, though, is Blood Boil. So Blood Boil does physical damage if you build that side of it. So you can easily run into a pack and you can cast Blood Boil to kill the monsters. If you actually stack Blood Boil, it does a pretty significant amount of damage, and you can easily murder most of the fire immunes just by using Blood Boil. Do be aware, though, that Blood Boil does hurt the Tainted, and you will have to also use that together with Engorge, which I don't seem to have right now. Engorge heals your minions. So if you want to end up using the Blood Boil for the purposes of damaging the fire immunes, you got to make sure that you toss in a Engorge every now and then to heal them. And that's pretty much it. I'm excited for Season 14. I'll be there on May the 22nd when the season launches. And let me know what you guys are going to pick for Season 14. What character are you most interested in for this new season? Do you want to like see how far you can push your Javazon this season with all of the nasty negative resistance? Are you going to try your Hammerdin with all the plus magic skill damage and negative res? Are you going to run through on like a Necromancer with Bone Spear or something? Let me know what you guys want to do. As always, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe button, and keep watching. Wee whoop.